Hi everybody, it's Mr. Wissner back today to continue our discussion of the Battle of Gettysburg. And we're looking specifically today at the second day of the battle, the day that included fighting in the wheat field, on Little Round Top, and as well as fighting on Culp's Hill as some of the primary locations where the battle was being fought. So we're going to take a closer look at those areas. As I mentioned last time, this is a lesson, or these discussions are designed specifically for my fourth grade students, but I really think they're things that could apply to anybody with an interest in the Battle of Gettysburg and an interest in learning about that battle. So we're going to pick up where we left off last time. We're going to take a look at day two, and there were some really interesting things that occurred on day two, and some very interesting personalities as well that come out of day two that we'll be talking about. So where we left off, if you look here, here's a map that kind of shows where things were on day one, and you can see how the Union lines were being pushed back through town. And we talked at the end of our last discussion about how over the night additional troops arrived and reinforced. So on day two, the map looks more like this. And you can see they're starting to form this famous fishhook formation that the Union line formed. So the Union had sort of an interior line that gave them the ability, with that fishhook shape, the ability to easily move troops back and forth, which is going to be really important here in just a little bit. So what's going on here and what's happening here is we have the South trying to attack the North in a very strong position on high ground, in a very good formation where they have this ability to move their troops and reinforce each other easily as needed. So that's what we have on the second day of the battle. By the morning of July 2nd, 1863, we were up to 65,000 Confederate soldiers facing about 80,000 Union soldiers. The Union Army held a strong position, occupying high ground at Culp's Hill, Cemetery Hill, and Big and Little Round Top. The Confederate Army wanted to defeat the Union forces on this high ground. And as I mentioned, I believe yesterday or in the last lesson, the high ground was very important. It was hard to attack an enemy if you were marching up a hill or if you were trying to shoot uphill. Very hard to aim exactly accurately that way. So during the morning and the early afternoon, a Confederate general named James Longstreet, he was commanding the First Corps of the Confederate Army, basically was Lee's second in command, especially now that famous General Thomas Stonewall Jackson had been killed about 2 months earlier at Chancellorsville. Longstreet was really Lee's most trusted subordinate at this point. Longstreet shifted his troops into position to attack the Union position on Little Round Top, and much of the earlier fighting in the day focused sort of around those maneuvers. So Longstreet was trying to get himself into position where he could attack the Union. And then there was fighting in these other areas, the wheat field, the Devil's Den, the Peach Orchard. All of these areas of the battlefield sort of focused around getting in position to attack the stronger Union position on Little Round Top. Now, the reason Chamberlain and his men were on Little Round Top is because the guy who had been assigned to be there, a man named Dan Sickles, had decided that wasn't a very good spot and it wasn't where he wanted to be. So he, against orders, took his troops, moved forward into the wheat field. And that really put the Union Army in a tough spot. It left one of their flanks hanging. It left this body of troops, this corps of troops with Sickles in command, kind of out in the open and exposed, and easy for the Confederates to attack. So Union General Dan Sickles was assigned to hold the position on Little Round Top. There he is. And Sickles disobeyed orders. He moved his troops forward. He moved them into the Devil's Den, the Peach Orchard, and the wheat field, which, as I said, are all very famous areas of the battlefield where there was very, very fierce fighting. The wheat field, I believe, changed hands, I want to say 6 times during the course of the battle. So for a while it was in Union control, then it was in Confederate control, and back and forth. So that's a sign of very, very heavy fighting and massive casualties at the wheat field as well. Incidentally, for those of you that are listening from my own area, that's where the 62nd Pennsylvania Company M, the company of soldiers from Hollidaysburg, whose flag is on display at the Hollidaysburg Area Senior High School during the school year, and then the Hollidaysburg Area Public Library in the summertime. That's where the 62nd Pennsylvania Company M was fighting at Gettysburg. That was their area, and their monument is still there to this day. So Sickles is out in front of everybody else. He moved his troops against orders out in front of the line. In fact, he's nearly a half a mile in front of the Union battle lines where he was supposed to be. This left Little Round Top completely at risk and undefended. Now, a little bit more about Sickles here before we move on and continue reading. General Sickles, actually prior to the war, was the first person to use insanity, temporary insanity, as a trial defense. He had killed a man, and he claimed that he had killed the man because he was temporarily insane. So, and he was successful in using that defense. So, kind of a crazy story there. And we'll talk more about some of the crazy things that relate to Sickles here in just a bit as well. Okay. So about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the Confederates attacked Little Round Top after fighting through the peach orchard, through the wheat field, through Devil's Den. Confederate soldiers had noticed that Little Round Top was undefended, and they prepared to take the hill. If they could have gotten cannons up there, if they could have gotten artillery up there, then that would have been a very, very good position for them. They would have been able to go right down the Union line and pretty much collapse the entire Union army. At the same time, General Meade ordered a new group of Union soldiers. He ordered his 5th Corps, commanded by a man named Gouverneur K. Warren, to defend the hill that Sickles had left uncovered. The Union soldiers arrived in time to occupy and defend the hill. At the far left side of the Union Army was the 20th Maine Infantry Regiment, led by Colonel Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. And Colonel Chamberlain, unlike many of the soldiers fighting in the war, was not a career military man. He was actually a professor before the Civil War. He was a professor at Bowdoin College in Maine, and when the war broke out, he actually took a sabbatical. He took a leave of absence, claiming he was going off to study and further his education, and instead he went and enlisted and joined the Union Army because he just felt the calling that he couldn't not be a part of this war. He couldn't not be a part of defending his country. He felt it was something important that he had to do. If the Confederate troops were able to get around Chamberlain's regiment, if they could kind of move around to the side, the Union Army would have been surrounded, and they would have been able to roll up the Union line. It was a maneuver called flanking. And so I want to show you a little bit more about what flanking means, or what flanking looks like. So I'm going to play this little just sort of video clip here of what a flanking maneuver looks like. And it wouldn't happen just exactly like this. It wouldn't happen right in front of the enemy. But basically, one part of the army would kind of try to go around the outside of the other. And Chamberlain's job was to prevent this from happening. His job was to prevent himself and the entire 5th Corps from being outflanked by the Confederates. So that was what he was doing on Little Round Top. And you can see, if they can get around that side of the enemy, it's hard to get the whole line positioned to fire off to the side like that. So it's a very successful position for someone to kind of put themselves in. And that's what the South was trying to do. They were trying to get around the flank of Colonel Chamberlain and the 20th Maine and the rest of the 5th Corps. Now, the group that was doing that, the Confederate regiment that was attacking the Union position, was the 15th Alabama. They were led by a commander named Colonel William C. Oates. And that fight on Little Round Top raged on for about an hour and a half. The Confederates came up that hill. They charged up that hill over and over, and they were pushed back. And then they'd charge again and then be pushed back. So very ferocious fighting on both sides. The fighting lasts so long that Chamberlain's men started to run out of ammunition. They were running out of bullets. And realizing the importance of his position, realizing what would happen if he was flanked, if they had lost that spot, Chamberlain refused to back down. He refused to surrender or to give up his spot. So he ordered his men to fix their bayonets. Now, a bayonet is a sort of knife-like attachment that affixes to the end of the rifle. It can still be fired while the bayonet's fixed. So the rifle would have a bayonet. Most of the soldiers had bayonets, but a lot of times they weren't used very much in the war, during the course of the war. There were some things going on with technology at the time of the Civil War where soldiers weren't getting as close as they once did. The bayonet was an absolutely essential weapon at the time of the Revolutionary War. And one of the reasons that the colonials had so trouble with the British for so long is the British were well trained in using their bayonets. It took the colonials time to sort of catch up, the Continental Army. So Chamberlain decided he was out of options. They're running out of bullets. The South just keeps coming. So they're going to fix bayonets. They're going to charge the enemy, and they're going to see what happens. So that's what he does. The men of the 15th Alabama were so surprised by that bayonet attack that many of them surrendered immediately, and others turned and simply ran away. As a result, many people consider Colonel Chamberlain the hero of the Battle of Gettysburg. He's someone that's heavily focused on in the Ken Burns Civil War documentary. He's somebody that's even more heavily focused on in Michael Shara's The Killer Angels book, which is what the movie Gettysburg was based on. So it was Chamberlain's courage, Chamberlain's unconventional bravery on Little Round Top that sort of set him and the 20th Maine apart and really may have indeed saved the day for the Union Army. But we're going to find out later he wasn't the only one with such bravery. Now, in the meantime, Sickles' men that had advanced into the peach orchard north of the Round Tops were under a fierce attack from Confederate soldiers. And this is all happening sort of at and around the same time in the afternoon of July 2nd. So one soldier from Texas fighting in the peach orchard described it as such. It looked like so much lead was flying through the air that it looked like a man could hold out their hat and catch it full of bullets. Can you imagine that line? There's so many bullets flying around you that if you held out your hat, it would get filled up very quickly with bullets. Could you imagine standing in a place like that? The courage that these men have, whether they were on the northern side or the southern side, just an incredible amount of courage, bravery, dedication to their duties. It was an amazing thing. And it's something, again, that the Civil War has always sort of been an inspirational thing. War is a terrible thing, but the courage of these men to fight for what they believed in, wow. And as a reenactor, I've kind of stood in that situation without the bullets flying. And it's a scary thing sometimes to think when you see a few thousand guns level on you and fire, and you see the smoke and you hear the noise. It can be a scary thing. And to imagine what these guys were going through with real bullets coming out of those guns, so thick that you could hold out your hat and catch it full, that's incredible to me. So Sickles' men would attack, and then they'd be forced to retreat over and over, fighting through areas of the battlefield that are famous to this day for the heavy fighting that occurred there, again including the wheat field and Devil's Den. Now, during this fighting, at some point Sickles lost his leg. His leg was shot off by a cannon, right around the knee. So he lost his leg during the fighting. One Minnesota regiment. Oh, back to Sickles for just a moment. Now, after losing his leg, Sickles actually had it amputated, the rest of the leg, and had an operation. But they found the leg, and they found the cannonball that shot it off. So rather than just throwing it away or burying it the way they sometimes did with amputated limbs, Sickles donated his leg to a museum. At that time, it was called the Army Medical Museum, or the Army Medical Museum. And it's still on display today at the Army Medical Museum. But at the time, Sickles actually would go visit his leg. He would go and stand there at the museum later on after the war. He served as a congressman. And actually, he's one of the reasons Gettysburg and other Civil War battlefields became dedicated as national parks. So even though he's a little different, even though he didn't maybe follow orders, we still have a lot to be thankful to Sickles for, because he is the one who really kind of helped make sure that we can go visit places like Gettysburg and learn from them. But yeah, Sickles' leg right there. Whew. And yeah, he'd go visit it, he'd talk to it, they say. So all those sorts of things. Another Minnesota regiment fighting in this area lost 215 out of 260 men in only 5 minutes. Now that's 215 casualties, so that's not just killed, but it's killed, wounded, captured. But 215 casualties in 5 minutes. It's way longer than I've been talking already, or way shorter than I've been talking already, rather. I've been talking longer than that. So that's amazing. 5 minutes, 215 men gone. Only 47 men were left in the regiment. Okay. So all this is going on. Now, even later in the day, on the other side of the battlefield, so we're on the left end of the Union line, if you're standing on the Union line, down to the left. On the right end of the Union line, this is on an area known as Culp's Hill. So a different area of the battlefield. And Culp's Hill, by the way, is one of my favorite places to visit when I go to the Gettysburg battlefield. It's a little quieter. It's not quite as well known as some of the other parts of the field, in part because it's not featured as heavily in the movie Gettysburg or in some of the other popular source materials. So it's kind of a quieter area, it's peaceful there, and there's still evidence of the entrenchments, the trenches, the ditches that the soldiers dug for protection during the battle. So it's really a neat place to see. If you ever go to Gettysburg, don't skip over Culp's Hill. Make sure you take some time to stop there and check that out, because it's really interesting. But much later in the day, late at night, it's getting on toward dark. So there's an attack on the Union position at Culp's Hill. Many of the Union soldiers who had been placed on Culp's Hill had been sent to help the 5th Corps on the Round Tops. So many of the soldiers who had originally been assigned there after Sickles left his position and after the 5th Corps was getting in trouble and being attacked, these guys went to reinforce that position using that fishhook shape that we had talked about earlier. It would be hours until they could return, and it was after 8 o'clock when Confederate troops crossed Rock Creek at the bottom of the hill. Now this is July, so dusk is falling around this time. This is July, but it's also before daylight savings time. So Confederate troops are crossing Rock Creek. It's getting very dark. Night's starting to fall. And nighttime attacks are very rare during the Civil War. It became very difficult to see when darkness fell, and that's part of the reason the South lost General Stonewall Jackson. He was shot by his own men in the confusion of trying to do some night reconnaissance, figure out what was going on. So the general in command of Culp's Hill for the Union was a man named George Sears Green. He had only one brigade of men. He had about 1,300 troops facing an entire Confederate division. So he's looking at a division of about 4,500 Confederates. He's got 1,300 soldiers. He's badly outnumbered. Okay? Greene ordered his men to spread out behind the log fences that men had made earlier in the day. And because of the darkness and the way the Union Army had spread out, the Confederate general believed he was facing a far greater force than he actually was, and called off the attack until the next morning. As deadly as the second day at the Battle of Gettysburg was, the third day would prove to be even worse. So what General Greene's men would be doing, actually, instead of, in the Civil War, most of the time the fighting was occurring with men who were standing shoulder to shoulder, so one next to the other, very tight ranks, shoulder to shoulder. And as night was falling and you couldn't see the actual troops, you'd be figuring out the position and the strength of your enemy based on how long the lines were and where the gun blasts were coming from, because when these guns fire, you see the blast of fire coming out of those barrels. So if instead of being tightly packed together, we're spaced out further and we keep moving around, so I'm going to fire from here, then I might move over here and fire, so it looks like there's a gun here and a gun here. And so as they're firing these guns over and over and moving back and forth and spreading out and have these big gaps between them, it makes it look like they take up a lot more space than what they actually do. And so they were able to deceive the Confederates. The Confederates called off their attack, and even though Greene was badly outnumbered, he was able to hold Culp's Hill for the evening against the Confederate assault. So the South had tried to get around the left side of the Union line on the Round Tops. He had tried to get around, General Lee had tried to get around the right side on Culp's Hill. He had been unsuccessful in both of those cases, and the North held on to carry that second day at the Battle of Gettysburg. So that's where we'll wrap up for now. If you're interested, like I mentioned last time, I use these sort of lessons and discussions and readings to lead into watching some clips from the Battle of Gettysburg. So if you're interested in watching the clips that I associate with this, you're going to want to find, again, hopefully you can find the DVDs or Blu-rays of the movie Gettysburg, or check them out from the library perhaps. And you want to go to the scene. There's a scene where there's a group of men praying and some drums and some fifes playing, and that sort of kicks off the scenes that I show for this section. So it'll lead right into the Battle of Little Round Top with Colonel Chamberlain. There's a scene, I think, shortly after that where Colonel Chamberlain, his brother, and another soldier named Buster Kilrain are kind of sitting under a tree waiting for orders. So that's kind of the area of the movie that we're at here. And then watch through the full Battle of Little Round Top and enjoy kind of seeing some of this come to life. So thanks for watching. As I mentioned last time, any questions, comments you have, please feel free to post them, and I'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.